What if I told you that while most Australians cluster in coastal cities complaining about traffic, housing costs and overcrowding while simultaneously refusing to live anywhere more than 30 minutes from a beach, there are towns scattered across the continent so isolated that their nearest neighbours are hundreds of kilometres away. Supplies arrive by plane or dirt road when weather permits, and the residents wouldn't trade their remote existence for city convenience, even if you paid them capital city wages and promised unlimited access to cafes serving overpriced coffee with foam art. Sounds like romanticised nonsense about hardy pioneers from someone who's never actually experienced isolation beyond missing one delivery and having to wait until tomorrow, right? Wrong. I'm Mr. Austral, and these towns exist, genuine Australian communities where isolation isn't inconvenience to be tolerated, but lifestyle choice deliberately made by people who value space, self-reliance, and freedom from urban density. Want to see them? Let's start. Number 10, Birdsville, Queensland, Desert Edge Community. We're starting with Birdsville, a town in far southwest Queensland, about 1,590 kilometres west of Brisbane, where the permanent population is 115 people who live at the edge of the Simpson Desert, in isolation so complete that mail comes by plane. Supplies arrive weekly if roads are passable. And the nearest town of any significance is Windora, which is 360 kilometres away and isn't exactly metropolitan itself. Birdsville exists primarily because it's the last supply point before the Simpson Desert crossing, and it's famous for the annual Birdsville races, where the population swells from 100 to over 10,000 for a weekend of outback horse racing, then returns to quiet isolation for another year. The isolation is extraordinary. You're hours from anywhere on unsealed roads that become impassable during rain, and if something goes wrong mechanically or medically, you're managing it yourself or waiting hours for assistance. The reasons people stay in Birdsville are varied but share common themes. Some are born there and can't imagine living anywhere else. The isolation is normal rather than extreme, and the space and freedom feel like privilege rather than deprivation. Some moved deliberately seeking escape from urban density, and they've found peace in knowing that their nearest neighbours are kilometres away, and traffic means seeing 3 vehicles in a day instead of 3,000 per hour. The lifestyle is self-reliant. You can't call someone to fix things. You fix them yourself or wait days for parts and tradespeople to arrive. Your water comes from the Great Artesian Basin, pumped from bores, stored in tanks, and managed carefully because waste is an option. Your power is likely solar because grid connection is impossible at this isolation, and you've learned to manage electricity consumption based on sunlight availability rather than assuming unlimited supply. The employment is limited but sufficient for the small population. The pub employs staff, the general store needs workers, the fuel station requires attendants, and surrounding pastoral properties need station hands. Remote area nurses and teachers serve on posting, often from elsewhere, but sometimes falling in love with isolation and staying permanently. The annual races bring brief economic boom, but year-round life is quiet and economically minimal. The community is extraordinarily tight because isolation creates dependence on each other. When you're hours from emergency services, your neighbours are your first responders, your support system, and your social life. The pub is community centre where everyone gathers, information is shared, and relationships are maintained through regular interaction rather than scheduled social events. People stay in Birdsville because the isolation provides freedom from complexity. There's no traffic, no crime to speak of, no bureaucracy interfering constantly in your life. The cost of living is low because housing is cheap and your expenses are minimal when entertainment is sunsets, stargazing, and conversations with people you've known for years. The trade-off of isolation for simplicity appeals to specific personalities who'd rather manage desert challenges than navigate urban dysfunction. Number 9, Inaminka, South Australia, Cooper Creek Outpost. Inaminka is in far northeast South Australia on Cooper Creek, about 1,100 kilometres northeast of Adelaide, with permanent population around 30 people living in isolation, so extreme that the town is primarily tourist destination for four-wheel drive travellers and service point for surrounding oil and gas operations, rather than functional community in traditional sense. The isolation is profound. Inaminka is accessible by unsealed roads that require proper preparation and vehicle capability. The nearest towns are hours away, and services are minimal. Pub, trading post, and campground are the primary infrastructure. The permanent residents are those running tourist services, working in oil and gas, or living there because they've chosen isolation deliberately. The reasons people stay are fascinating. Some are attracted by the history. Inaminka was base for Burke and Will's expedition, and their tragic story gives the area significance that resonates with people who value history and connection to exploration narratives. The Cooper Creek waterholes are permanent water in desert environment, creating oasis effect that's visually and practically significant. The lifestyle is frontier living in modern context. You're managing your own water, power, and waste systems. Medical care is evacuation by Royal Flying Doctor Service if emergencies arise. Supplies come from periodic trips to larger towns, or deliveries arranged through trading post. You're living without infrastructure most Australians consider essential, and you're doing it because the isolation provides something cities can't. Genuine quiet, dark skies with Milky Way visible clearly, and space measured in horizons rather than meters. The employment is tourism and oil gas operations. The pub and trading post employ staff, and surrounding petroleum operations provide well-paid work for qualified personnel. Some residents work remotely in industries that allow geographic independence, using satellite internet despite its limitations to earn capital city wages while living in one of Australia's most remote locations. People stay in Inaminka because the isolation is the point. They're not tolerating remoteness to access employment or affordability. They're choosing isolation because it provides lifestyle that urban density makes impossible. The lack of neighbours isn't deprivation. It's liberation from the constant presence of others and the social obligations that proximity creates. Number 8. Cook, South Australia, railway crossing. Ghost town. Cook is a railway siding on the Nullarbor Plain in South Australia with permanent population of 4 people. Yes, 4. Cook exists solely to service the Transcontinental Railway, and the town consists of a handful of buildings, former school, hospital, railway workers' houses, all dating from when the railway employed hundreds and the town was functional community rather than nearly abandoned outpost with skeleton crew. The isolation is absolute. Cook is over 400 kilometres from nearest towns in either direction, sitting on the longest straight railway track in the world, crossing treeless plain where earth and sky merge at horizons, and the emptiness is so complete it becomes overwhelming for people unaccustomed to genuine solitude. The 4 residents are railway workers and caretakers who maintain essential facilities and provide services during train stops. The reasons the 4 residents stay are pragmatic and philosophical. Pragmatically, they're employed to be there. Someone needs to maintain facilities and service trains. And these 4 have accepted posting that most Australians would refuse regardless of pay. Philosophically, they've embraced isolation that borders on absurdist. Living in near ghost town with 4 people, total creates experience so unusual that it becomes appealing to personalities who find meaning in extremity. The lifestyle is minimal. The residents live in former railway workers' houses, maintain buildings enough to remain functional, and service trains that stop for crew changes. Their social life is each other and occasional interaction with train passengers during stops. Supplies come by train or infrequent road deliveries. Entertainment is what they create. Reading, projects, and the kind of introspection that isolation forces. The employment is railway maintenance and caretaking. It's not lucrative, but it's stable. And the cost of living is minimal because housing is provided and expenses are few when you're hundreds of kilometres from shops and temptations to spend. The isolation provides forced savings. You can't spend money when nothing is available to purchase. People stay in Cook because the isolation is so extreme, it becomes philosophically interesting. Living in town with 4 people total is experience most humans never have. And for those 4, it provides perspective on community, solitude, and what humans actually need versus what we've been conditioned to think we need. The Nullarbor's emptiness strips life to essentials, and some people find that clarifying rather than depressing. Number 7. Tibooburra. New South Wales, corner country, isolation. Tibooburra is in the far northwest corner of New South Wales, about 330 kilometres north of Broken Hill, with population around 150 living in isolation, characterised by distance from everywhere, extreme temperatures, and unsealed roads that make access challenging during wet periods when routes become impassable and the town is temporarily cut off. The isolation is geographical and climatic. Tibooburra is at the junction of New South Wales, Queensland, and South Australia, surrounded by desert and pastoral country where distances are measured in hours rather than kilometres. The summer heat is extreme. Temperatures regularly exceed 45 degrees, and outdoor activity is limited to early morning and late evening when heat becomes merely oppressive rather than dangerous. The reasons people stay are varied. Some work in tourism operating pubs and accommodation for outback travellers. Some work on surrounding pastoral properties where Tibooburra is nearest town for supplies and socialising. Some are retired and living on cheap housing in isolation they find peaceful rather than challenging. And some are escaping, backgrounds they'd rather leave behind, legal issues, or simply urban life that became unbearable. The lifestyle is outback practical. The two pubs are social centres where community gathers, news is shared, and entertainment is conversation rather than screens. The general store provides essentials, and bigger shopping requires trips to Broken Hill, which is a 5-hour drive on roads that are maintained but unsealed and require appropriate vehicles. Medical services are basic. Royal Flying Doctor Service provides emergency evacuation, and Broken Hill Hospital handles serious care. Subscribe to show that these videos actually help and make sense. The employment is limited to pastoral work, tourism, and government services. The local school employs teachers, the health service needs nurses, and the council requires workers. It's not employment diverse, but it's stable enough for small populations' needs. People stay in Tibooburra because the isolation creates community cohesion impossible in cities. When you're 300 kilometres from the nearest alternative, your neighbours become essential rather than optional. The pubs aren't just drinking establishments, they're community infrastructure where everyone gathers, relationships are maintained, and social life happens. The isolation forces engagement rather than allowing the urban pattern where you can live anonymously among millions. Number 6. Mungindi, New South Wales to Queensland border. Cotton Town isolation. Mungindi sits on the New South Wales-Queensland border, about 750 kilometres northwest of Sydney, straddling the Barwon River with population around 800 divided between the two states. The isolation is agricultural. Mungindi is surrounded by cotton farms and pastoral properties, hours from regional centres, and economically dependent on agriculture that creates boom-bust cycles affecting the entire community. The isolation is less about distance and more about economic and social separation from broader Australia. Mungindi is agricultural community where life revolves around planting and harvest cycles, and the concerns are water allocation, commodity prices, and weather, rather than urban preoccupations like traffic and housing prices. The reasons people stay are predominantly agricultural. Multi-generational farming families own properties surrounding Mungindi, and the town exists to service those properties. Children grow up on farms, often leave for education or work, and many return because farming is identity and lifestyle rather than just employment. The connection to land and family creates retention that economic rationality alone wouldn't justify. The lifestyle is agricultural rhythm. During cotton harvest, the town is busy with workers, trucks, and activity. During off-seasons, it's quiet, and the population drops as seasonal workers leave. The pub, general store, and school are community anchors, and social life revolves around agricultural shows, sports leagues, and events that bring surrounding properties' families together. The employment is agriculture, transport, and services supporting farming. Cotton requires significant labour during harvest, and surrounding properties need station hands, mechanics, and support workers. The isolation limits employment diversity, but agricultural wages can be solid, and cost of living is low because housing is cheap and expenses are minimal. People stay in Mungindi because agricultural life provides meaning that urban employment often lacks. Working land, managing livestock, and participating in food production creates tangible results and connection to natural cycles. The isolation from urban culture is feature rather than bug. It preserves agricultural identity and community cohesion that urban integration would dilute. Number 5. Marble Bar, Western Australia, hottest town survival. Marble Bar is in the Pilbara region of Western Australia, about 1,420 kilometres north of Perth, with population around 200 living in the town that regularly claims title of Australia's hottest, with summer temperatures exceeding 40 degrees for extended periods and the heat creating isolation as effective as distance because travelling or working outdoors becomes dangerous during peak heat. The isolation is thermal and geographic. Marble Bar is hours from Port Hedland, the nearest significant town, on roads that cross harsh Pilbara landscape where breakdowns can be dangerous and preparation is essential. The extreme heat isolates the town climatically. During summer, outdoor work is limited to early morning, and the heat creates challenges for vehicles, infrastructure, and human comfort that wouldn't exist in temperate climates. The reasons people stay are predominantly economic. The Pilbara is mining country, and Marble Bar services surrounding mining operations, pastoral properties, and exploration activities. Mining wages justify heat tolerance for workers accumulating capital, and some residents are long-term locals who've adapted to conditions that outsiders find unbearable. The lifestyle is heat management. Buildings are designed for thermal stress with air conditioning essential rather than optional. Daily routines adjust to temperature. Work during cool morning hours, rest during midday heat, resume activity in evening. Water consumption is high, and managing dehydration is constant concern. The landscape is harsh beauty, red rock, spinifex, and that stark Pilbara aesthetic where survival requires respect for environment. The employment is mining, pastoral work, and tourism servicing travellers exploring Pilbara. The famous Marble Bar Pool and Chinaman's Pool attract visitors despite heat, and the town's reputation as Australia's hottest creates curiosity tourism that supports local businesses. People stay in Marble Bar because the heat and isolation create barriers that filter population to those who can handle extremity. The resulting community is resilient, practical, and proud of surviving conditions that most Australians would flee. The isolation from mainstream culture creates identity based on toughness and adaptation rather than consumption and convenience. Number 4. Menzies, Western Australia, Goldfields Ghost Town. Life Menzies is in Western Australia's Goldfields, about 130 kilometres north of Kalgoorlie, with population around 150 living in former gold rush town that boomed to 10,000 residents in the 1890s, then collapsed when gold ran out, leaving grand buildings slowly decaying and tiny permanent population maintaining minimal services. The isolation is temporal and economic. Menzies is isolated by decline. The town that was once significant is now bypassed and forgotten, and the isolation comes from being removed from economic activity rather than just geographical remoteness. The population is predominantly older residents who remember better times, artists attracted by cheap buildings and solitude, and transient mining workers when gold prices make small operations viable. The reasons people stay are varied and fascinating. Some stayed through decline because leaving meant abandoning homes, history, and identity built over lifetimes. Some moved deliberately, seeking cheap housing and artistic isolation where rent is negligible and creative work can happen without urban distractions and cost. Some are there temporarily for mining work, and some are escaping legal issues, relationship failures, or urban life that became unbearable. The lifestyle is ghost town reality. The Grand Hotel operates with handful of staff serving occasional travellers and local drinkers. The general store provides essentials, but selection is minimal. Many buildings are empty or collapsing, creating atmosphere where past is physically present in ruins surrounding functioning community. The isolation creates unique aesthetic. You're living in town that's simultaneously alive and dying, and that tension creates meaning for people who find suburbs spiritually deadening. The employment is minimal: pub, store, occasional mining, and government services. The school employs teachers for a handful of students, and the health service has nurse. It's not economically vibrant, but the cost of living is so low that minimal income sustains life. And some residents live on pension or savings in houses they bought for prices lower than annual urban rent. People stay in Menzies because the isolation and decline create freedom from expectations. You're not judged by career success, property ownership, or social status because everyone is there by choice or circumstance that doesn't include traditional success. The community accepts eccentricity and difference because isolation filters for people who don't fit standard patterns, and that creates tolerance impossible in conventional communities. Number 3. Maralinga, South Australia, nuclear test site legacy. Maralinga is in remote South Australia, about 800 kilometres northwest of Adelaide. And while it's not traditional town with permanent population, it exists as location where cleanup workers, traditional owners, and occasional visitors live temporarily or permanently in isolation, created by nuclear testing legacy that makes the area simultaneously significant historically and avoided practically. The isolation is nuclear and cultural. Maralinga was British nuclear test site in the 1950s and 60s, and while cleanup has occurred, the legacy creates isolation through perception and reality. The traditional owners, the Anangu people, have rights to the land, but the nuclear history creates ongoing concerns and management requirements that limit normal settlement patterns. The reasons people stay or return to Maralinga lands are predominantly cultural and economic. Traditional owners maintain connection to country despite nuclear history because cultural ties transcend contamination concerns. Cleanup workers and monitoring personnel live there temporarily or long-term because employment requires presence. And researchers study the area because nuclear legacy creates ongoing scientific and environmental monitoring needs. The lifestyle is remoteness with infrastructure. Unlike many isolated communities relying on minimal services, Maralinga has facilities built for nuclear operations and later cleanup work, accommodation, power, water, and communications that exceed typical outback infrastructure. The isolation is social rather than infrastructural. You're surrounded by desert with nearest towns hours away, but your living conditions are better than many remote locations because the site was built for extended operations. The employment is cleanup, monitoring, and traditional owner roles, managing land and cultural sites. It's not traditional community employment, but it's stable work in extremely remote location that pays well because isolation and nuclear legacy require premium wages to attract workers. People stay in Maralinga area because the isolation combined with relatively good infrastructure creates unique employment opportunity. And for traditional owners, the cultural connection transcends nuclear history and isolation. The legacy creates complex relationship where the land is simultaneously valued and complicated by history that can't be erased but can be managed and lived with. Number 2. Umbiigurri, Western Australia, abandoned community return. Umbiigurri is unique on this list because it was Aboriginal community in the Kimberley, with population that peaked at around 200 before being controversially closed by the Western Australian government in 2013 due to social dysfunction, violence, and the state's determination that remote community support was unsustainable. The community was demolished, but traditional owners maintain connection, and some have returned or visit regularly despite absence of services or infrastructure. The isolation is political and cultural. Umbiigurri is isolated geographically, accessible by rough road or boat, but more significantly, it's isolated by policy decisions that deemed remote Aboriginal communities unsustainable and forced closures that displaced residents. The traditional owner's insistence on maintaining connection despite closure and demolition demonstrates how isolation interacts with cultural identity in ways that Western policy frameworks don't accommodate. The reasons people maintain connection or attempt return are entirely cultural. Traditional owners have ancestral connection to Umbiigurri land that transcends practical considerations about services, employment, or infrastructure. The forced closure and demolition created trauma and loss, and maintaining presence, even without services, is resistance to policies that treated remote Aboriginal communities as failures requiring closure rather than as communities requiring appropriate support. The lifestyle for those who visit or attempt permanent presence is extreme self-reliance. No services exist, no power, water, or infrastructure beyond what individuals establish. The isolation is total, and the presence is often symbolic as much as practical, maintaining connection to country and refusing to accept that government closure ends traditional owners' relationship to their land. The employment is non-existent in traditional sense. Those maintaining connection often live on income from art, cultural work, or pensions. And the presence at Umbiigurri is cultural maintenance rather than economic activity. The isolation doesn't provide practical benefits. It's maintained despite practical challenges because cultural connection transcends utility calculations. People maintain connection to Umbiigurri despite closure because the isolation and absence of infrastructure don't negate cultural ties. The example demonstrates that isolation for Indigenous Australians operates differently than for non-Indigenous residents. It's not choice based on lifestyle preferences, but maintenance of connection that colonisation and policy disrupted but couldn't eliminate. Number 1. Tibooburra Station, Western Australia, Desert Pastoral Extreme. At number 1, not a town, but a way of life. The remote pastoral stations of Western Australia's desert regions, where families live on properties measuring hundreds of thousands of hectares, with homesteads hours from nearest neighbours, and the isolation is so complete that visiting town means multi-day trips. Children are educated via School of the Air, and medical emergencies require Royal Flying Doctor Service evacuation because ground transport would take too long. Tibooburra Station represents this lifestyle, a pastoral property in Western Australia's Gibson Desert, where the nearest town is hundreds of kilometres away, and the isolation is chosen deliberately by families who run cattle on marginal country in conditions most Australians would consider uninhabitable. Similar properties exist across inland Australia, Maori pastoral properties in South Australia, Channel Country stations in Queensland, and Barkly tableland operations in Northern Territory. The isolation is operational and philosophical. These properties are isolated because good cattle country requires vast acreage in areas where rainfall is minimal and carrying capacity is low. One beast per 50 to 100 hectares is common in desert country, meaning profitable operation requires property sizes that create inevitable isolation. But the isolation is also chosen. Families could live in town and manage properties remotely, but they choose to live on property because the pastoral lifestyle is identity, and they prefer isolation to urban convenience. The reasons people stay are deep-rooted. Multi-generational pastoral families have worked the same properties for over a century, and the connection to land, livestock, and lifestyle transcends economic rationality. Cattle prices fluctuate, droughts devastate, and economic returns are often marginal, but families stay because pastoral work provides meaning, autonomy, and connection to land that urban employment can't replicate. The lifestyle is self-reliance taken to extremes. Water comes from bores, tapping the Great Artesian Basin. Power is diesel generators or solar systems. Communication is satellite phone and internet. Medical care is flying doctor or managing yourself until evacuation is possible. Education for children is School of the Air. Radio and internet-based lessons with annual boarding school attendance for secondary education. Supplies are bulk ordered and trucked in, and running out of essentials means managing without because resupply is weeks away. The employment is pastoral work, managing livestock, maintaining infrastructure, and running business that operates across vast distances with minimal labour. Family members work the property, and station hands are hired for mustering and major projects, often working in isolation for months at a time. People stay on remote pastoral stations because the isolation provides freedom impossible elsewhere. You're managing your own time, making decisions without bureaucratic interference, and living in landscape so vast and empty that your nearest neighbour is 50 kilometres away and you measure your property in hundreds of square kilometres. The trade-off of convenience for autonomy appeals to people who value independence over access, and the isolation creates family bonds and self-reliance that suburban convenience weakens. Support the channel by subscribing because content exploring why people choose isolation over convenience beats influencers promoting hustle culture while living in overpriced apartments where success means paying rent without complaint. And there you have it, 10 examples of Australian isolation where people choose remoteness for freedom, identity, culture, or escape from urban density that promised opportunity but delivered stress, debt, and the grinding realization that convenience comes at cost of autonomy, space, and the silence that allows you to hear yourself think. Subscribe for content exploring how Australians live beyond the coastal cities that dominate national imagination while delivering diminishing returns to participants who can't afford exit.